What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 177. I'm the host, Kyle Anslone. The great Scott Horton returns to the show today. Of course, everybody knows who Scott is. He's the author of Enough Already and Fool's Errand, the editorial director of antiwar.com, and the founder and the director of the Libertarian Institute. And Scott comes back on the show to talk about the legacy of Colin Powell, who, of course, if you turn on your TV and look at anything right now, they're talking about how great the man was. And Scott really sets the record straight on what a liar and a fraud he was, and the massive pile of bodies that could be laid at Colin Powell's feet for what he has been responsible for. And we break all that down, going all the way back to Vietnam, of course, highlighting his UN war speech, but also his time in the first Gulf War. So a lot of important stuff in this episode. You're not going to want to miss it. And everybody just check out the Libertarian Institute and support the show either at Patreon, Subscribestar, donating crypto, or by getting your CBD products at Paloma Verde. The URL is palomaverdecbd.com. They have a fantastic lineup of CBD products there. They even got products for your dog, but my personal favorites are their topicals. I use their sports cream nearly every day. It works great at relieving back pain, and I can't recommend it enough. If anybody ever tells me, oh, I got a little bit of pain, especially if it's like some kind of muscle pain, I'm like, here, use this. You're not going to regret it. And most of the time people tell me it worked absolutely great for them. So I'm sure it'll work well for you. Check out palomaverdecbd.com. Use the promo code PEACE, P-E-A-C-E. That saves you 25% off when you spend $75 or more. And here's the interview with Scott Horton. What's up, Scott? Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Kyle?
Doing pretty good. And just before we start talking about Colin Powell here, want to remind people that we have our fall fund drive going on at the Libertarian Institute. Tons of great stuff that Scott will give you if you go and donate money over there, including $25 will get you a copy of a digital book from the Institute. And are you going to be able to give away an audio book or anything for Enough Already?
Not yet. I'm working on. I was traveling. I had to go and do the Tom Woods thing in Orlando, which was great. But I just got the mastered version of the thing, and I just barely started listening to it. I already found a couple of errors, so I'm gonna have a little bit of work to do on that before it's all the way ready already. But if we hurry, and if the fund drive takes too long, then maybe by the end of the fund drive.
All right. But you could definitely get digital physical signed copies of all the books and everything that we got at the Institute. So go over, support all of our great work. It's a lot of great writers, the Scott Horton Show, Pete Quinones, and Keith, Pat, Tommy, and the whole gang. So just tons of great stuff there.
We got two different kinds of these Ron Paul copper coins. I'm all out of the silver, man. Those days are over. But I got a few of these coppers left, and there's two different kinds of them, the lesser and the more better. So if people are interested in those. These are actually the Bernard von Nothaus Liberty Dollars, a few of those, the Ron Paul. So these are probably, like if you're around back then during the campaigns, these would be the more collector's item-y ones of the two kinds. But they're both great. They're gigantic Ron Paul pennies, I tell you. They're awesome. And other great stuff, like you said. Lots of good kickbacks there.
But mostly you want to do it because you want to support all the great work that we're putting out over there. And Scott, let's just start talking about it. Colin Powell is dead, and
yeah,
how
about that? Him and a lot of other people.
Yeah, with Don Rumsfeld too in the past year, and I mean we're still waiting on Cheney and everything like that. Who knows how many more hearts he could go through, but. Colin Powell's dead. And so if you're watching the mainstream media, one of the reasons I want to talk about this, or even just going through Twitter, it's pretty positive. He made a mistake on Iraq, but overall he was a really important guy in all of this. And so, Scott, I know that you're not going to say that when I ask you about Colin Powell, and I'll let you start maybe at before the Iraq thing though, because I think that's the part that almost nobody knows is he was at least somewhat involved in I was reading a piece actually today by Mark Perry and Norman Solomon from back in 2000 about his involvement with covering up the My Lai massacre, everything he did post Vietnam. So let's start there and just go forward.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I guess I want to say something about how strange it is to a libertarian to hear people talk about government officials in I guess the common understanding, right, that whatever violence that they commit with state power is just an entirely different category of morality. It's like if, Zeus on Mount Olympus decides to do something, who the hell are you to question that? A god can kill a man if he wants to. But these guys are just men and not very talented ones. And yet, the worst that you could say about all the people that got killed in this guy's massive killing projects that he was engaged in many different areas of the world. Those are mistakes. Those are differences of opinion. Guy on Twitter said to me yesterday, geez, you can't just demonize your political opponents. But man, there are people who go to life in prison for committing one crime against one person. A lot of them really deserve it, But if you're a government official, there's just, it's like a judge overseeing a corrupt trial where the DA withholds evidence and railroads some guy and the judge just lets it happen. You can't sue him for that. You can't charge him for a crime for that. You can say the judge is an accessory in a kidnapping plot with the DA. They just get away with it. It goes without saying they're immune, not just from the law, but from just even the rules of morality at all. Colin Powell, look, Kyle, he may have killed hundreds of thousands, maybe even more than 1 million people, but you got to understand, we all make mistakes. What? Okay, I get it. I mean, I understand. For people, they go to government school. That's how you learn about it. The first quote of my new book is Bill Clinton says, and this is from a foreignpolicy.com article if people want to look at it. He says, terror means killing and robbery and coercion by people who do not have state authority. And that's it. And so I'll get back to Vietnam in a second, but just directly on that point, it was Colin Powell, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Iraq War I, who oversaw and implemented the plan to bomb the water, the electricity, all the oil refineries, the trucks, the bridges, the civilian infrastructure of the country. And as I don't know if there are quotes out of his mouth about this. There may be. I should have read his memoirs. There may be, direct quotes from him about this, but certainly military officials under his command or lower than him in the chain of command, sort of. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff is a weird position. He's not exactly in the chain of command, but he sort of kind of is. But anyway, his inferiors in the military, if I could put it that way, said, well, yeah, of course. What do you think we were trying to do? Make life easy for the people of Iraq? Of course we're trying to make it harder on them because, hey, after all, he's the dictator of their country. In a way, they're responsible for his actions. And so we're punishing them for that and coercing them. You want your electricity turned back on? You get rid of Saddam and we'll let you turn your electricity back on. And that was what they said. That's terrorism. That's killing innocent civilians in order to coerce a political result, directly targeting them. That's terrorism. But as Bill Clinton said, with state authority, so that's fine. But imagine the shoe on the other foot. Imagine a bunch of Middle East countries ganging up on and attacking a Western European country or America or Canada. Imagine some guy sends some suicide bombers to crash planes into our skyscrapers and justifies it by saying, well, the American people say that they're a democracy. They pay taxes. They're responsible. Those are the exact words of Osama bin Laden, Kyle. It's the exact same thinking of the American government. All he was doing was echoing Colin Powell, his former paymaster, and echoing, people like Madeleine Albright, Clinton's Secretary of State, who helped to continue to implement the sanctions regime
did you
against
see
Iraq.
that one? I forget who had her on to talk about what a loss Colin Powell was. I mean,
Yeah,
like these two are in cahoots together in like this awful crime against the Iraqi people, and then you bring her on to memorialize him as they're both some kind of heroes is crazy.
Yeah. Well, who else are you going to ask? Antiwar.com?
Yeah.
So, yeah. But now, so going back, I read the piece that you're talking about. So Robert Perry at consortiumnews.com, and who's separate and distinct from Mark Perry, both greats. But just to be clear there.
Yeah, that was my mistake.
And yeah, no problem. But so Robert Perry has this great piece, and there's a guy named, you know what? I'm sorry. Let me look at it because I had it highlighted because I knew I was going to forget the guy's name. It's Tom Glenn. Okay, there's a guy in Vietnam named Tom Glenn. He's an Army officer, and he wrote a letter to the command saying that, listen, there are massive war crimes being committed against the civilian population of South Vietnam right now out here. And it's a widespread thing, and I've seen it myself, and I've heard a lot of stories about it from other groups we've worked with and seen some of them, some of their stuff in action, and something's got to be done here. And Colonel Powell, or maybe Lieutenant Colonel Powell, I forget, he essentially hushed all this up. Instead of saying, oh, God, we got to have an investigation and figure out, he helped lead the cover-up on it. And, which is probably one of the things that helped make his career. That he said, well, this guy, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. And he doesn't really have the access to say what's really going on here. And then, it wasn't until later. And I guess the My Lai massacre is, I think if I read this right, Kyle, you can chime in here. You read the same thing as me. If I remember what he wrote in here right, that the My Lai massacre was actually part of this guy's litany of examples. And because they covered that up, it didn't come out until an entire other investigation was spurred later on by entirely different people in America, and then they gave it to Seymour Hersh and all of that. So in other words, he was covering up, people say he covered up My Lai, but he covered up this report about widespread war crimes across southern Vietnam at the hands of American troops, including My Lai. And here's the thing of it. You might be able to see in the background. Oh, I got my awesome Ron Paul art is now covering it up, but it used to be back there. You could see the book with the stripes. That's Kill Anything That Moves by Nick Terse. And it's entirely based on internal Army investigations of their own soldiers' war crimes. That's the only source in it. And it's just sick. It's just sick. And Powell, I've read a few things today, and there are a couple quotes going around on Twitter with quotes from his memoirs and other things where he's explaining that, yeah, of course, we're brutalizing the civilian population there. That's part of our counterinsurgency strategy. Boy, call something a counterinsurgency strategy, and you can do things that make no sense whatsoever. So they're saying, well, it's the people's war, and the guerrillas live among the people, so we got to just disrupt all the people. Like, this is where they coined the cliche that military intelligence is the oxymoron. That, like, you idiots, you're not only the redcoats, but the redcoats, at least, their civilization had spawned this one that was separating away. But you're like the redcoats, to the Indians, the Americans to the Indians, much less the English to the white Anglo-Americans.
Well, the British to the actual Indians is probably a pretty good example.
Oh, right, yeah. Yeah, the actual Indians and the American Indians for that matter. And then you're winning their hearts and minds by being absolutely the most ruthless killers in town, and that'll teach them to cross you, huh? I mean, come on. The Strategic Hamlet program, what's funny about that is it's almost like forced communism, right? They have all these people, like the Vietnamese not only believed in private property, but they worshipped it because their land was the land of their ancestors going back, and their like ancestor worship was a huge part of their religion stuff. So you think about, how, harshly or intensely Americans identify with their land, especially if it's like their grandfather's land and it's still in their family or something like that. We're talking about people's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's land. And they worship their ancestors' spirits as still alive, watching over them and tied to that land. And then the Americans come and say, yeah, we're going to put you in a strategic hamlet, which is no different than like Stalin rounding people up and forcing them onto a collective farm. Now you're going to farm this land, this worthless, land. And now you're going to suffer under this warlord. And you're going to do all, you're going to be suffering victims. And that's what'll win these people over to want to, support the South Vietnamese government that we're trying to prop up there. I mean, the level of stupidity and insanity and brutality in the Vietnam War and the way that those things work together there. Just the absolute ignorance in which these guys went forward with their plans. And then Powell did nothing but justify it. Well, of course we had to go in there and burn all their villages down. These were villages where Viet Cong had been seen. And I read even a quote of him saying, you may have heard of this before, here's some rules of engagement. If a helicopter, and this is like almost perfect paraphrase of his words here. If a helicopter gunner sees a farmer wearing black pajamas and who's a MAM, a military-aged male, a ma'am, he's a military-aged male and he's out in the field and he's wearing black pajamas, what you do is you shoot near him. And if he runs, then that is indication that he's enemy, and then you can kill him. And then, of course, a lot of times they just kill him right out anyway. But if someone runs from a guy firing an M60 at them from the side of a Huey, then that means that it's the running that indicates their guilt as a member of the insurgency. And then, so, I mean, I don't know, man. It's funny to me how anyone can be like a grown adult and think that this is a way to win a war where you're trying. What's the goal of the war? The goal of the war is to solidify the authority of the puppet government of South Vietnam. And to do that, we got to win the hearts and minds of the people of South Vietnam and make them love this state, make them prefer this state to the evil commies in the north who are trying to take them over. So then what do? Their policy is essentially make themselves worse than the devil and give the South Vietnamese people no point of view possible other than, God, I wish the commies would come and liberate me from these Anglo invaders from overseas, which is exactly what happened and exactly why America lost that war. After killing something between 3 and 5 million people, nobody really knows. And kicking over the domino that they said that they were trying to prevent by, supporting Lon Nol and the corrupt regime in Cambodia to allow the Americans to bomb the hell out of it all the time, which radicalized the entire population, pushed people in the arms of the Khmer Rouge, and completely discredited the rule of the king and allowed the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot to take over and create a communist dictatorship there. So not that all that was Colin Powell's fault. He's a colonel at the time, but there's a happy participant in it and apologist for it. Well, and he says the rest of that quote, he goes, hey, listen, in a war, these lines of morality between good and evil get blurred. Oh, really? Shooting an unarmed peasant farming in a field. He might be a soldier because he's a military-aged male. If the Nazis did that, we'd call it a war crime. When the Nazis did that, we called it a war crime. That's a war crime. You're not allowed to just massacre innocent people because you think they could maybe be, even though he's not carrying an AK. And which goes to the entire question of waging war in third world countries, occupying these countries and installing and propping up governments over people and waging counterinsurgency campaigns against those who dare resist. How could anyone think that any of these things are going to turn out like in the Pentagon's promises? They haven't.
So, right. So,
and that goes to the rest of his career too. I guess Panama would be the exception. That worked. They got rid of the CIA sock puppet and replaced him with another one who basically held things together in the way that they wanted. They just killed a couple of 10,000 people in the process of doing it. And I'm skipping ahead because he also, that was under H.W. Bush, but under Reagan, Powell was national security advisor during all of what was going on in El Salvador and Nicaragua. And I know he's very close to and involved in the process of arming the government of El Salvador against the rebels there. And I don't know. I'm sure he was involved in Iran-Contra to one degree or another, but I don't remember anymore his role in that. But remember, they called it Iran-Contra because it wasn't just arming the Contras. It was selling missiles to the Ayatollah. Same time they're arming Saddam Hussein's war against him, they're having the Israelis sell the Iranians missiles in order to try to get hostages freed from Lebanon, which never even really worked anyway. But so I'm not exactly sure his role in that, but he was national security advisor at the time. And if he wasn't advising if he didn't know everything about it and wasn't advising the president against it, he wasn't doing his job. So that's at the absolute minimum on that. But I know he was involved back in the death squads in El Salvador. And then, like I say, the invasion of Panama in 1989, they killed something like 10,000 people. I don't know if there was ever a legitimate count and that was absolutely unnecessary. I mean, Manuel Noriega was George Bush's guy. He'd been CIA, a CIA paid asset for 30 years or something by that time, and had been involved in Iran-Contra with them and fighting in Nicaragua and all of that. And so, the idea that they couldn't find a way to take care of whatever the problem was with him, whatever, never mind any legitimate threat to the American people. Obviously, that's ridiculous. But whatever threat he was to the Americans' plans, the idea that they couldn't find a way to negotiate a solution and could only launch a war in the middle of the night without any congressional approval whatsoever and launch a regime change like that. And Powell is, of course, a huge part of that. I mean, that was, he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the time. And of course, was right in the top of all the decision making on the inside of the council with H.W. Bush and Brent Scowcroft and James Baker and all them when they launched that war. And then that was what really set the stage for Iraq was, man, Panama was great. And without having to worry about what the Soviets are going to do, as Cold War's ending here, we could do whatever we want. Like, look how easy that was. We could do that again. Remember how we just picked up the phone and coordinated it and got it done? Let's do that again. And that was kind of the way, was the basis of their thinking and going into Iraq War I. So now I'm sorry I'm rambling. I'll let you say something before I go into Iraq War I here.
No,
I can tell you're trying to get in there.
Yeah, no, this is perfect time because I wanted to talk to you about like the Powell doctrine and everything like that specifically. In that, I guess for me, I only really remember him as the Secretary of State. The Secretary of State. Like, that's it. And I think most people like my age and a lot of like the viewers of this show are even younger than me only remember him as just like the guy who lied about the Iraq War. But he was important enough that in 1993, Justin Raimondo wrote a book about him. Right. So like what happened in the Iraq War and like the Powell doctrine. And I guess one of the reasons why he was so important as Secretary of State was that he was kind of seen as being a successful military leader after like the disasters of Vietnam.
Well, listen, I mean, they wanted to run him for president in 96. Some people did. And the story was that his wife talked him out of it, that she was just too fearful that he would be assassinated for being the first black president. And he just owed it to her. Then if she didn't want to do it, then he would not do it. But the Republican establishment for a time, I think, wanted to run him. But then they decided, no, that'd be all right. They'll get a Bush son in there in 2000. And that'll be good enough. They can have their war then. But yeah, I mean, he did. He had this huge career. He wrote this massive best-selling memoir in the 1990s. He's considered to be one of the most popular public figures, and like, they have there's Hollywood, and then there's Nerd Hollywood on the East Coast. He was like the biggest of big shots among those guys. And he was a great TV performer during Iraq War I. He and General Scowcroft would get up there and point at the maps and point at the, TV screens where they're showing you the 1 or 2% of bombs that were laser guided bombs. And, rather than just dumb bombs, which was the vast majority of what they used in Iraq War I, emptying those old inventories. But, he became very famous. Iraq War I know you're too young, but Iraq War I, man, it was a show. Like George Carlin says, man, it was the first war that was on every channel plus cable. Like, it was an extravaganza, Kyle. It was, and 2002 and the lead up to Iraq War II was a bit like this too. But like, man, they put new country music songs on the radio. There's yellow ribbons tied around every cylinder, tree or pole, anywhere in America outside where there's something round and tall. It's got a yellow ribbon tied around it, or else, how come you spit on the soldiers, boy? And just the level of hype around that thing is just incredible. So it made real stars out of. In fact, there was a guy, I can't remember his name now. One of the anchors on CNN was like a handsome guy, and so he got like movie star level famous. And all the ladies loved him, and all of this stuff. Like, that was how it was. It was completely bananas, dude. Um, and so he got made into a huge media star through being the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff during Iraq War I. And, it should be mentioned that, and I wish I'd had a chance to bring this up in the debate with Bill Kristol, Kyle, that if you read the declaration of war against Saddam Hussein in the Weekly Standard in 1997, it's written by Paul Wolfowitz and Zalmay Khalilzad, and it's called Overthrow Him. And the first line is, if he just stopped at the northern oil fields, he probably would have gotten away with it. And, Wolfowitz was Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy at the time. So, and Khalilzad worked for him. So that ain't blowing smoke. That's, again, the 10th source from inside the H.W. Bush government who said that, he essentially had permission to invade the northern oil fields. He just took it too far, went all the way to Kuwait City and the coast, and then got in trouble with Margaret Thatcher, and then H.W. Bush got in trouble with Margaret Thatcher, and then we had a war. It was essentially how that happened. Anyway, it just goes to show that was just absolutely an unnecessary war. It just absolutely did not have to be that way. And as I demonstrate in the latest book, mostly block quoting Noam Chomsky, but I've tracked down a lot of his sources myself and show he's exactly right, that all through the second half of 1990, from August through January, man, Hussein was just trying to save a little bit of face on the way out. I'll leave Kuwait. Just let me keep these two little islands. It's Bubiyan, and I forgot the other one, his name. These two little uninhabited islands. He wanted to have an oil transfer facility there. And that was fine. They could have done that. And now any token face-saving thing. In fact, by the end, Kyle, Saddam was offering, I'm sorry I'm taking too long on this. By the end of the thing, by like January, when the war is imminent, Hussein is saying, look, forget Bubiyan and whatever the other one, the islands. Forget any of that. All I want is a promise that American troops will withdraw from the region and that Israel will withdraw from the Palestinian territories. But no time limit, no structure, no roadmap, no plan, no nothing, no teeth, no nothing. All I want is tissue paper face saving here. That you promise that if I do leave, that everything will be fine one day. Whatever, dude. Sure, Saddam. That's all they had to say. Sure, Saddam. Israel will get out of the West Bank someday. And that would have been enough, And they wouldn't do it. They wanted that war so damn bad. It was, God, I'm telling you, man. That's why I always hit on this refrain, because I think it's the most important point of all, right? Is that it didn't have to be this way. There's, I guess the phrase is like the page of history turning, or the winds of time blowing, or something, where certainly when you learn history in fourth grade, if they teach you anything about the world you're living in elementary school anymore, they teach you essentially that everything did have to be this way. That, of course, FDR had to do the New Deal. And, of course, whatever, the world wars. Of course, everything. Of course, Truman had to use the nukes or he wouldn't have used them. Of course, underlines all of it. It's a democracy. And that means the people choose the very best of us to make the best decisions that they can at the time that reflect the will of the people. And you're telling me the majority of most people are bad and wrong? That couldn't be right. So then everything that happened is how it was supposed to happen. But then get a little bit older and you go, no. Actually, if Brent Scowcroft had just taken a left instead of a right, nothing like this would have happened at all. None of this would have happened at all. Because everything that we talk about when we talk about the war on terrorism is the aftermath of Iraq War I, which, of course, itself was the aftermath of the Iran-Iraq War. That, of course, Colin Powell was involved, at least in helping arm the Iraqis. I don't know if he was directly involved in the arming the Iranians part. I guess he probably must have been. So then, after Iraq War I, they kept the sanctions. And H.W. Bush said repeatedly, and this was the consensus of the military and the White House, that we're going to keep these sanctions until Saddam Hussein is removed from power. And the bet was, it's sort of like they used to say this about North Korea all the time. He'll collapse any day now. Oh, he's teetering on the edge. Oh, they're on the brink of collapse. like Assad. Yeah, we can back Al-Qaeda a little bit because Assad is going to fall before Al-Qaeda grows too big. Don't worry, Kyle. We game this out. We know it's, they think that. And then but of course, that what happened was they impoverished the people of Iraq, and relative to Saddam Hussein, they were weaker and weaker. It's not like he was, making a killing. But even as they said at the time, it was the cliche, oh, he takes the oil for food program money and he's spending it all on his palaces. Like, who knows if that's even true at all? It probably just meant he was beefing up security at him or something, getting a little repainting done. But anyway, he sure wasn't, doing everything he could to provide for the people of Iraq, particularly factions that were his enemies inside the country and whatever. So they knew that. Like, that was their argument against him. See what a bad guy that he is? He just spends it all in his palaces. I was like, yeah, but you guys are admitting that whatever money you're letting get in there is not getting to the people. So maybe we need to find a better way to proceed. And then the answer was, no, we're just going to keep it like this. And I think Madeleine Albright, I guarantee you, dude, if you could find it in the record somewhere, I bet you could find Madeleine Albright saying, well, my predecessor, Colin Powell, thought that this was great. I guess Warren Christopher was before her. But, this is, if Colin Powell and Warren Christopher think this is the great policy, then this is the great policy. And she, in fact, announced in 1997, and I document all this in Fool's Errand. I think it's in both. Rolf Ekius of the United Nations Inspectors was going to declare in an official statement and report that Iraq was weapons of mass destruction free, certified. And they knew that since the end of 1995. They were 100% certain that all the weapons had been destroyed at the end of 1991. That's just the facts. And right when he was about to do that, instead, Madeleine Albright gave a speech. And at one point, I had found the speech. I think I have the URL for the speech. At least, probably would work at the Wayback Machine, if nothing else now. Of the video of her giving this speech in 1997 and declaring that Iraq is, Saddam Hussein is irredeemable. He cannot ever be brought in from the cold. He's as bad as Hitler or whatever it is. And so we're going to keep the sanctions regime on until Saddam Hussein is removed from power. And then the Clinton people, they passed the Iraq Regime Change Act. What was it called? The Iraq Liberation Act of 1998 at the insistence of the Project for a New American Century types. But Clinton didn't have the political capital or the will to invade the country and get it done. So essentially, it was just a ticking bomb. And you could quote Ron Paul from back then. Ron Paul goes, this is a ticking time bomb, man. This thing is going on. We're declaring it's our official policy to seek regime change in Iraq. That means a war. This is a virtual declaration of war. Those are his exact words in 1998. So we should not be doing this. And God, ain't nobody listen to him but me. But and then so then jump ahead to 2001. Powell comes in. Well, let's go to 2000. People are voting for W. Bush because they think that Powell is going to be in charge. That's why they're voting for him. Well, Powell's not running, but Powell's agreed to be the Secretary of State. And so that's pretty good. We can trust him. We know him. He's this great, wonderful, moral, mild-mannered character and whatever. We like that guy. And so that was what they thought they were getting. In fact, they were getting Dick Cheney and Paul Wolfowitz, right? Donald Rumsfeld. And Colin Powell really wasn't in charge. So for all my condemning him to burn in hell and on Twitter and whatever, which he does deserve, the reality is he was not the worst in the W. Bush administration, but he was not in charge. And which in a way, as Dave DeCamp, our colleague at antiwar.com, was tweeting out, that makes him worse. Kind of like, depending on how you look at it, from if he's not just a psychopath like the rest of these guys, and he's not just Israel first or like the rest of these guys, and he sees all the possible drawbacks because he bothered to learn a thing or two about it and know why to know better. And then he goes along anyway. And then he never really expressed any real regret about it either, But, General Zinni gave one big speech where he said we shouldn't do this. He had been the previous commander of CENTCOM. He said we should not be doing this. And Colin Powell saw it. He knew it as much about it as Zinni did and knew why not to do it for the same reasons that Zinni knew not to do it. And he told Bush not to do it, Iraq War II. But then he said, but I'm with you no matter what, boss. And then so when Bush said, well, I'm not listening to you, I'm listening to them, and I want to do it, he said, okay. And when they said, listen, if we send, who's the ambassador to the UN at the time? I'm sorry, I forget. maybe it was Negroponte was the ambassador to the UN at the time. If we send Negroponte out there to make the case at the UN, he's not going to get it done. If anyone can get it done, it's you. And if anyone has a high enough popularity rating that you can afford to take the hit for lying to everybody, you're the guy. And he could have just said, screw this, man, I'm not doing it. And instead he said, okay. And then in his right-hand man, his chief of staff, no, his real right-hand man, I guess, would be Dick Armitage, the deputy secretary of state, was also his close friend. But his chief of staff is now a great anti-war activist, Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, full bird colonel, who was his chief of staff, the secretary of state's chief of staff, and his old friend from the Bush senior days and all that, had been his chief of staff then. And Wilkerson has told a story about how Scooter Libby and the vice president's office wrote a draft speech for Powell that was just absolute garbage, accusing him of all of the craziest stuff, and including, having his agents meet with Mohammed Atta, the lead hijacker, in Prague, and all of this just absolute inanity. So Powell knew, oh my God, this is such garbage. And he threw the whole thing away. And he called George Tenet at the CIA. So I'm not going with the vice president's office. I want you and your guys to come in here and help me write this speech. And I'll go with whatever you guys say is true, because these neocons, their case is just garbage, man. I'm not going on worldwide TV making these claims, man. So then the CIA comes in, and they're almost as full of it. They're virtually as full of it as the neocons, although it's hard to judge on a sliding scale. I mean, but everything that they said was a lie, and including they used testimony that was tortured out of Sheikh Ibn al-Libi, claiming that Saddam was teaching Al-Qaeda how to use poison gas. I mean, the CIA was, just as bad as the neocons on this, really, just in their own different way. But they gave them the aluminum tubes. Man, Kyle, me and Eric Garris were just reminiscing about this yesterday on the show. I remember in my brain, and you can find it right now on the Wayback Machine. You type in antiwar.com and go look at their little calendar. You know the way they do the calendar? Go click through on their September dates from 2002, and you'll find the front page of antiwar.com, the old yellow page from back then. And you'll find it's like right in the middle of the top stories. It's a Joby Warwick story in the Washington Post that in real life in the paper ran on like page 36 or something like that. But on antiwar.com, it was in the top headlines. And I remember this day reading it then. That like, oh my God, look. In fact, I remember telling my completely unimpressed girlfriend at the time, oh my God, look, the Washington Post is debunking the aluminum tubes. These aluminum tubes are for rockets. They can never be used for centrifuges. And he didn't have the ability to make gas. And then get this, Kyle, this is what's funny. It's Joby Warwick, the horrible Joby Warwick, quoting David Albright, the horrible David Albright, who, did go along with some of the claims against Saddam Hussein. It was invoked as, see, even David Albright says it's true on some of the claims about chemical weapons. But on the nuclear stuff, he was like, this is BS, man. And, Joby Warwick, he's the guy who famously eulogized Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the leader of ISIS, when the Delta Force killed him. And, oh, no, Delta Force killed the austere religious scholar Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. That's Joby Warwick, okay? That's how horrible this human is. But he debunked the aluminum tube story September of 2002. And they kept pushing that lie all the way until the war anyway. They just didn't care. And they just pushed it anyway for months and months and months.
Real quick, Scott, yeah. I just wanted to point out that I found this article.
Zarqawi. Don't let me forget Zarqawi. Sorry, go ahead.
I found this article today from Justin Raimondo from December 25th, 2000. So this is before the Bush administration even starts. And he talks about how that he has no doubt that they're going to rain down bombs on the Iraqi people, and how Colin Powell is a liar with a forked tongue. And it's just absolutely like nails what happens in the Bush administration. And it just felt fantastic from Raimondo. I'll put the link in the show notes page for anybody who wants to go look at it. But he like specifically nails like 4 or 5 things that happened like 3 years before. So I guess
wait, just on that point real quick. I'm sorry, I'll go back to that. But Raimondo wrote The Myth of the Saddam Bomb. That's in the year 2000. And then this one is great. I found this when I was looking for a new Justin called Bill Kristol the little Lenin of the neoconservative movement. And he called he called the whole conspiracy to get us into the Iraq War. He called it the Axis of Crystal. And so I went and searched that, Raimondo Axis of Crystal, and I'm not sure, I guess I didn't remember this, that the article that's from is called Our Hijacked Foreign Policy. And then the subhead is, and this is from February 2002. And the subhead is, Neocons Take Washington. Baghdad is next. This is like a year and 3 months before the war, and it's all about the neocons in the Pentagon and the vice president's office and all their plot to get us into war and the Project for New American Century and all that. So seriously, especially for you youngins, go back, spend a rainy Sunday, man, and just go through and just tear through Raimondo's articles. Start at 99 and read them as fast as you can. Don't even pay attention. Just read as fast as you can, and you'll get it, by osmosis. Just read 1,000 of these things. Read him through at least early Obama. You might give up after a while, but man, through W. Bush years, oh my God, there's nobody better on the planet.
Right. And there's still like a lot you'll really learn from it too. It's not just that, oh yeah, Justin was right about everything. You'll learn like little facts and stuff about these guys that have been, long forgotten by pretty much everyone. Scott, one of the things I want to mention about Colin Powell is I was 13 when this war starts, but I do remember that there was like this perception before the speech that like this guy was going to come out and tell the world the truth. Like it was on Colin Powell to like convince people, and a lot of people after it happened, I remember saying, well, General Powell thinks so, and that was just like the way to say like, what do you mean Russia didn't have the election? It says it right in the Washington Post. Like that's who he was, and that there was like some real excitement for the Iraq War because it was supposed to be like the first Gulf War, and Powell was a part of that, and the Powell Doctrine and everything, where this was going to be like a real American like flag waving victory. Afghanistan was a mess. Osama bin Laden was still on the run, but there was going to be like like almost like a movie. I think is kind of what I like. Just as a kid, that's what I expected. Like to see footage of the Americans going in and taking out the bad guys and then raising the flag in Baghdad, and like we were all gonna like cheer and everything. It was going to be a great victory, and Powell being a part in giving that speech, I think, really contributed to that whole narrative.
Oh yeah, no, I mean it was the cherry on top. I mean this was the deal. This was the thing that sealed the deal for, a huge number of especially liberal Democrats in D.C. who were wavering on this and were like, I don't know, man, but geez, if Colin Powell says so. So, and then the same thing in the population at large. I mean, he moved. I just read a thing yesterday. Sorry, I don't have my footnote for you, but I read a thing that said that American public opinion moved 10 points from that speech and from the coverage of it. Mm-hmm. And that there was also a vast increase of the number of people who believed that Saddam had done 9/11 because he told so many lies about ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda in that speech, including trying to claim that Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was, one, Al-Qaeda, and two, protected by Saddam Hussein, which was a total CIA. Multiple times, the CIA and the military had requested, CIA embedded and Special Operations Command together, I think, were like a task force before the war inside Iraq. And they wanted to go kill these guys in Kurdistan. And in fact, I think the Joint Chiefs asked for permission to kill Zarqawi and his group Ansar al-Sharia. No, it wasn't. That's Libya. Jeez. It's right on the tip of my tongue. There's two different names for it. His little group. He didn't remember, Kyle. Zarqawi didn't declare loyalty to bin Laden until a year and a half into the war, after the Second Battle of Fallujah in November of 2004. Did he declare that he was a member of Al-Qaeda? So that was a major lie that they told. And then you just think, for people who know the history of Iraq War II at all, where this guy Zarqawi did become a real problem. Like, he was obviously the centerpiece of their propaganda campaign, but he also was a real problem. And him and his followers were essentially the ringleaders of the foreign fighter Al-Qaeda suicide bomber brigades that were traveling around from the Middle East to go to Iraq War II to fight, just like it was the old Afghanistan war, with America in the place of the Russians. And, we didn't put enough guys in Afghanistan. Afghanistan's pretty remote too, but Iraq, we went ahead and did in Iraq what we deprived them of the opportunity to bog us down and bleed us to bankruptcy in Afghanistan. We'll just do it in Iraq instead. It's a lot easier for people from Saudi and Libya and Syria and everywhere else to get there too. And Zarqawi and his group, they led essentially the very, bloodiest and berserker kind of, madman part of the Sunni-based insurgency, butchering especially Shiite pilgrims, during religious ceremonies. They'd come and set up a suicide attack in the middle of a giant mob of civilian worshipers and stuff like this, and did so much to make that civil war as bad as it could possibly be on the Sunni side, the other side from the one America was fighting for. There's really kind of no underestimating how bad that policy was to, one, lie about Zarqawi that way and then use him as that prop, as an excuse for the war, which just gave him and his men an opportunity to be such a horrible part of the thing. But I got to tell you, man, not bragging, but just so that people understand the circumstances here. And it's true that, like, for a guy who was painting houses for a living, I was pretty up to date on this stuff, okay? I admit that. But I was painting a house with my buddy Adam, and I was listening to Colin Powell's speech. This is January 2002. I'm listening to Colin Powell's speech on NPR News over the radio. They're playing the whole thing. And in fact, we weren't really painting. We were like caulking the house, preparing it for painting, sanding some things and whatever, getting it ready. And I'm debunking every bit of it to my buddy Adam. And the things that I hadn't heard before, like, oh, this guy, Zarqawi, that's a new one they're pushing on us now. But I guarantee you that's not true. That, they're, conflating these things. Or here's a translation that we said, oh, here he is saying, hide all the stuff. And I'm just like, you know what? I don't speak Arabic, but I bet that's not what he's saying. And which, of course, turns out is correct. And I quote this in the latest book, In Enough Already, where he absolutely embellished the translations of those intercepts. And essentially they're saying, hey, just double check, make sure there's nothing in there. And then he adds all this stuff to make it sound more incriminating, like they're covering something up, rather than just double checking to make sure the CYA is all, And so anyway, yeah, and I was 5 or 6 or something at the time. And just reading antiwar.com, I had a little pirate radio show, I guess then. In early 2002 I did. I was not like the way you and I are right now. I was not like that. I didn't have the time in my life. I had to have a job. I have the time to sit around reading all this stuff all day long every day in that kind of obsessive way. But I could debunk any bit of that. I didn't believe a word of it. And I told my buddy Adam why it was all crap. And then you go home and turn on TV, and Sean Hannity's going, see, Colin Powell proved it. And then everybody just goes along with that. Like, wait, which part was the proof again? Which part was the part that wowed us so much? Or is it's just the spectacle of Powell in a suit sitting there saying, trust me. That's all it was, right? It wasn't any of the things he said. His little prop with the anthrax, this clear attempt to try to frame up Iraq for the anthrax attack on the United States without claiming it, but making it seem like that was what he was claiming. And it's really worked on people. By the time they attacked Iraq, two-thirds of the American people believed that Iraq had done September 11th. That was the level of BS. Yeah. And yes, it's just 100% correct. They could not have done it without him. Who are they going to send to talk to the UN? Dick Cheney? Who are they going to, it was too, people did respect Cheney way too much at that time. But still, like, that guy's suspicious, man. Like, you can't, you know what I mean? There's a little something there. Colin Powell had this thing where he's the Archangel Michael, man, or whatever. You can, no matter what, his word is gold. And his motives are pure, and he's our great guardian or whatever. Like, people just believed in that guy. And so when he came out and said it was true, that's how you knew it was true, according to all the dimwits. And then it just wasn't true. And imagine now, Kyle, seriously, Iraq under Saddam Hussein, and with its power circa 2003. Where Saddam doesn't even control his whole country. He only controls 8 towns out of 20 or whatever it is. You know what I mean? He's not even really the dictator of all of Iraq at that point. And we know now from his CIA interrogator, John Nixon, that he was no shit really writing a romance novel in semi-retirement. He was writing a love story. And they told your mom and dad, Kyle, that, look, we have to preempt an imminent attack by Saddam Hussein's Iraq and Osama bin Laden's Al-Qaeda on the United States. You really think we should just sit back and let the next 9/11 be accomplished with weapons of mass destruction? You would have us wait and disarm and do nothing in the face of this terror when it was just made up? This is a total lie. This is a total lie. They could have just said Sudan or Oman. Dude, you think we just wait around for Oman to attack us? What? Oman is not attacking us. Well, how come TV says that that's what we're doing? And as Willie Nelson said, they wouldn't lie to me. Not on my own damn TV. And that was people's point of view. And so they bought it. You know, and God bless Willie, because he wrote an anti-war song in 2003, that Christmas. He wrote a great anti-war song about all of that. And that was what he said. It was like, you know, focusing on the dishonesty of it all, that they would manipulate people in this way, you know?
Yeah. So I guess, like, you know, the last thing I want to ask you, Scott, is just, like, you know, this guy's legacy, right, is just like, especially from Vietnam on, he's all in and involved in the U.S. empire, and, you know, plays an important role in it, because maybe he's not George Bush or Condoleezza Rice, who's going to say something like the smoking gun could come in the form of a mushroom cloud, but he's going to.
I'm pretty sure he did say that.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I'm
well,
pretty
anyways,
sure they all that. I think it was Bush, Rice, Powell, and Cheney. All four used that phrase.
I don't remember
up by the
him
White
saying
House
that.
Iraq group, WIG.
But he seemed like the kind of guy that, you know, was far more measured and articulate. And, you know, that a 72-minute speech at the UN is one of those things that just comes off as like, oh, well, you know, this guy, you got to believe this guy. Look at him. And he speaks slow enough and, like, has a deep voice. And it all sounds very, very good, especially if you're just, like, listening along and kind of just osmosis absorbing what he's saying, you know. Oh, and by the way,
he never apologized. He never apologized. He acknowledged that what he said wasn't true, and he goes, yes, I regret that is a blot on my record. Right? He doesn't regret any of the pain he caused at all. He regrets that it makes him look bad, that wasn't true.
Yeah.
And he ain't sorry at all. A blot. Can you imagine?
And that 10% number was from, I think, Liz Featherstone in Jacobin. And she also says that moved the amount of Americans that thought there was ties between Saddam and Al-Qaeda 30% as well.
Right.
And so
right. That's
right. So this is his legacy. This is how important he is. And what are your final thoughts? Are, you know, what should, I guess, people take away? And if you want, you know, people to set the real legacy right about Colin Powell, you got to do it in just a couple minutes, like you got on cable TV. What are you telling people?
Well, look, I mean, he could have stopped that war. He could have resigned and went on Meet the Press and said, Tim, we don't need to do this. The evidence isn't there. With Saddam, you know, this is another agenda, a larger agenda. They're kind of hiding behind these excuses, and it's not good enough, and you're not supposed to start a war. Everybody knows that, and that's it. He could have stopped the damn thing. And now I don't really, I never really, you know, say that he's the ringleader, the kingpin of the thing, but he was the guy who absolutely was in the position to throw the switch and call a halt to it. And then what? He would have hurt Bush's father's feelings or something? In fact, I think Bush's father would have appreciated it. Bush's father had already sent James Baker and Brent Scowcroft to try to stop the boy. If he was really loyal to the father, he probably would have been doing him a favor to come out and say we should not be doing this. And man, I mean, the amount of grief, there's no way to measure the amount of grief and pain that these people caused by launching this war. And, you know, all of the different men who fought on all different sides of that war are responsible for the decisions that they made and the actions that they took. But it never would have been that way without this man as the key accomplice in it all. And that means, too, then, that the wars in Libya and Syria and Yemen, and for that matter, well, I guess Somalia was its own separate crisis, but you know, these other major three interventions in the Obama years and to this day in Yemen, and to this day in all three of those, in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen. That just wouldn't have been that way at all. All of that, the Arab Spring, and then the U.S. and Saudi hijacking of the Arab Spring, the counter-revolution launched there, and all of those things, all that was a direct result of Iraq War II. So just the entire 21st century didn't have to be this way at all. As even Zinni said in 2016, the war could have been over by Christmas. That wasn't just antiwar.com that said that. That was General Zinni. So we could have gone in there, forget, for argument's sake, extradition. We could have gone in there, killed Al-Qaeda, Tora Bora, and then left. You know what I learned recently, Kyle? Did you see the piece at Task and Purpose? Where it was the story of the guy who's the Air Force air controller at Tora Bora during the fight. And he talks about how they were all pulled out of there on December the 9th.
Yeah.
December the 9th. But bin Laden got away on the 17th. So if I had known that, I had forgotten that they had just ceased all air attacks. They called off all air and left the Delta Force and their local, militia allies, quote unquote allies, without any air power to help them. With still, more than a full week to go before the bad guys got away there. It's just unbelievable. And he was the Secretary of State during all that. He could have resigned over that. They're like, hey, I think they're deliberately letting the bad guys get away so they can try to conflate Osama with Saddam and get you angry and confused so they can launch a bonus war. He could have done that all along,
I mean,
and
so yeah. This is one thing everybody says, oh, he should have resigned. He should have resigned. Couldn't he just have not given that speech if he really moved a third of Americans? Yeah. Like he didn't have to give up his job. He just had to do one thing that he didn't think was the right thing to do anyways. He let himself be bullied into it, it seems
right.
Like.
And he's the Secretary of State. So he could have said, that's the UN ambassador's job. Let the UN ambassador go out there and dig himself this grave. I'm not going to do it. Right. But, they said, nope. It's got to be you. And he said, okay, instead of hell no. So, yeah, I mean, that is absolutely on him. And they couldn't have done it without him, man. Or maybe they could have, but it would have been much harder. They definitely could not have done it without his, avowed opposite or, with his avowed opposition. They couldn't have done it.
Hey, so, Scott, time for one last question, just about your debate with Bill Kristol. I had a couple people ask me, and I was actually a little curious about this myself. If you were at all maybe disappointed with Bill Kristol's lack of performance?
I mean, a little bit, but I mean, that was somewhat what I was expecting. I mean, I did not expect him to have a written statement. I expected him to just have kind of some notes and to wing it, and that he was going to basically do the glitter and generalities and the very easy summary that America's kept the peace in the world for 75 years, and who could argue with that, and that was what he was going to say. Now, I was willing to bet, although I didn't bet everything on it or anything, but I was willing to bet that he had not even bothered to Google me or find out, who he's dealing with up there or whatever. And so then that was my attitude was, look, this guy's so arrogant. He's not going to be prepared. He's going to get up there and say the same thing he always does. And then I guess my problem was my next step from there was I was worried about how he was going to respond to me explaining the real history of the last 20 years here, or even the last 40, and what a disaster it's all been, all these things that he supported. And I thought, the structure of the thing is it's an hour and a half. So after like the first 35, 40 minutes of our opening statements, and we still got an hour to scrap up there. And I thought, things could really devolve to the point where like maybe if I get him too upset and too on guard, he's going to start calling me an anti-Semite. And then how am I going to respond to that? And, that kind of thing. So it didn't go off the rails that way. That was my fear. I guess my fear was that even though I was trying to go easy on him, I really was not trying to make it all personal, whatever. But I knew that my case is sound and that it's thorough and that he wouldn't really be able to refute it and he wouldn't be able to just dismiss it either because it's so detailed and it's, factual and even like in drawing the connections between the different policies and all of these things. He tried to just remain really aloof and be like, well, you think that, but that's no big deal. But it was like, it kind of is a big deal. And I don't think that his aloof attitude really carried the day like it usually does. Usually he's up against like a Code Pink lady going, you're a war criminal. And he's just like, well, you're impolite and I'm a gentleman, blah, 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 and he did actually try to pull that on me. oh, you're violating the rules of the debate, making this personal, because I was accusing him of making money and stuff like that, which was true. But at the same time, though, this guy's not just a professor down at the university or like some guy who's a right-wing media guy that I disagree with. He's the founder of PNAC. He's the leader of the Axis of Crystal. He launched that goddamn war. Of other than people inside the Bush government and the Pentagon and the vice president's office. But in terms of people outside the government, he did more than any other man in this country to get us into that war, more than Krauthammer or any of the guys at the think tanks. You know, he was the most important one of all of them, leading at the Weekly Standard as editor of the Weekly Standard and leader of PNAC and all of those things. So there was a bit of accountability. I had to, like, you know, I don't know, at least say something. But I didn't really expect too much better. I guess I'm relieved because I expected worse is really the answer to your question. I was afraid that he was going to call me an anti-Semite. Then I had a funny line about how Israel has no worse friends than their own Likud party and their loyalists in the United States. And look at the trap that you guys, you know, the pit that you've dug Israel into now. Where, yeah, you got to keep the West Bank, but it's this giant albatross around your neck because it comes with 6 million people you despise but can't get rid of. And so now what are you going to do? Now you're living literally under apartheid, according to Ehud Barak and Ehud Olmert. So, and, you know, Olmert was Kadima party. He was a break off of Likud. This is Netanyahu's former colleague in the Likud party. Said, yeah, this is apartheid. It's really bad. Yeah, I know. So, in other words, there's nobody worse for Israel than Likud. And for that matter, Kadima. Olmert could have given up the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. I distinctly remember him not doing that. He was in power for many years, too. Forget how long, 6-7 years, something like that. So that was going to be my answer. If he started like trying to smear me or whatever, I was going to stick up for the Jews, protect them from Bill Kristol.
Well, I thought, I don't know if this was intentional on your part or not, but I think you said, like, you know, did like the Holocaust comparison is just like the 6 million number, that many people had died. And then he did like kind of go after and try to hit on that. And I thought the way you refuted that was probably the most brilliant way to do it in that setting, with, you know, Bill Kristol being your opposition. And so yeah, I thought that was handled like pretty brilliantly. I honestly thought he was going to like have at least something a little bit more crafty. Maybe this is just because like I was on the debate team in high school and college, and like I lost debates to people who like were dumber than me, that definitely who didn't understand the topic as well as me, because they were able to like kind of like, you know, pitch something kind of crafty or just, you know, speak like better. But I mean, he had given up by the end. He didn't even stand up for his closing statement, which was at least as much of a rule breaker as you bringing up new arguments in the end. So I feel like that was pretty much a wash anyways. But I don't know, Scott,
I love his body language was just priceless, through especially like at the end where he's just slumped.
Yep.
Like, and then Jack Kennedy slumped. Yeah, he slumped. And he's like, he starts putting his mask on. He's like, takes it off, but he puts the mask back on. Like, to me, like, he's just hiding, right? He's like, subconsciously, he's like, I gotta get the hell out of here, you know, kind of.
Yeah, that was kind of like he was like trying to get that thing over with. I think like 4 or 5 minutes into your opening statement, he just realized that he was beat, so he didn't really have anything to say. But Scott, thanks so much for doing that. That was I feel like the entire like anti-war community like had like just a great moment there, because, you know, for all these years we've all been saying like, hey, put us on the stage with any one of those guys and it's going to be an absolute, you know, destruction. It's going to be like, you know, an hour and a half of Ron Paul beating up Rudy Giuliani for a minute and a half, right? And that's exactly what we got. So I mean,
cool.
it was.
Well, I'm
it
glad
was
you're
awesome.
not disappointed. I was really worried that people were going to be. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to lose the thing, but I did think it might be a lot closer to a draw, and that you guys would be like, "Hey, you did pretty good, dude." You know what I mean?
Right.
And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, dude. I let y'all down." But and I should apologize because there were quite a few things that he said that were total BS that I just didn't have time to refute or presence of mind to refute, especially the sarin gas attack stuff and a few other things. One thing I really wish I'd said, he's bragging about nobody's used nuclear weapons in anger since World War II. And I didn't say, yeah, it was America that used nuclear weapons and destroyed 2 entire cities with them. Nobody else has ever done that except the USA as it was making its fatal turn to world empire, coincidentally enough. So I wish I had said that. There were a couple other points, but overall, I guess I'm just for 2 years, this was a thing coming up in the future. So now it's in the past, and I can do something else and worry about something else. But in fact, as soon as it was over, I had to buckle down on all my jokes for the Tom Woods thing in Orlando last weekend. I was like, man, I have right now, I swear, like literally, I have 2 full weeks of emails to catch up on because I've just been working on my jokes, which I guess you'll have to be the judge later when the video comes out of what you think of that. But I think they laughed. If I remember right, they laughed.
All right, I'll let you know, Scott. Everybody, the great Scott Horton, director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of 2 books, Enough Already and Fool's Errand. Also, the great Ron Paul's a book of transcripts of your interviews of the great Dr. Ron Paul. Donate to the Institute, support our fund drive. Thanks, Scott.
Oh, yeah. Thank you, man.